All right, my name is Wes Miller. I work in the Windows Core Technologies group, which, well, it's a big name that doesn't mean a lot if you don't know what I do. I work in the area commonly known as Windows setup. So my team does everything from the setup of Windows to my specific area is RIS and corporate deployment, sort of the corporate evangelist within the Windows setup team. Just setup in general. We also work on sysprep and most of the tools that you all have probably used for deploying Windows for quite some time now. So my talk today is deploying the Windows platform, and go ahead and dive right in. What I'm going to do today is talk to what we're calling either the Windows deployment tools or Windows deployment tool set. We're trying to come up with a coverall term that covers all of these the tons of tools that we make available for helping in deployment and helping people understand what they're used for, how to use them, and in addition, introducing some new tools that are some things that are new for .NET or were also new for XP and may even be improved in .NET. Take a quick look at comparing imaging versus scripted, where you'd use one versus the other. Then dig pretty deep into the tools themselves. Have a slide covering Windows product activation and how that can and can't come into play during a deployment. It's a concern that obviously came up during XP. Talk to some of the things that we're planning for a deployment website, and run over, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for some Q&A afterwards. Also, I'll be hanging around outside for anything we don't get covered. So the tools that we ship with, most of these are things that we shipped with Windows 2000 and are improved or are new for .NET Server. For RIS, which there are some great new improvements to, we do basically for bare metal setup, system recovery, and for system imaging, for imaging a system. RIPrep, the tool that's a cousin to sysprep. Sysprep, which is the tool for making your images deployable for file-based and partition-based copies. RIPrep, as I said. And then unattend files, which is the one that a lot of people are really familiar with, especially in the server deployment area, because sysprep traditionally hasn't been used there. There's also some cousins of the unattend.txt that you may or may not know of. Sysprep.inf, the tool for automating a sysprep install, and ristandard.sif, which is if you take a sif and actually look at it, it's almost the exact same thing as an unattend.txt. It's just got a few special entries in it, so RIS knows how to deal with it. Also be going over Windows PE or WinPE. You may or may not have heard of this. It's something we released with XP. We've got a few improvements in it for .NET. But we think overall it's going to be a great tool for helping server deployments. And it's great because it's very flexible. It gets you to a stable environment where you can do either an image-based deployment or do an unattend-based deployment. So you could launch XP or .NET setup from within WinPE. Also talk to group policy and SMS, how they can help in your deployment and migration infrastructure. And then another thing I definitely want to mention is the ability to do a command lines.txt and a GUI run once. These are things that the command lines.txt runs during what we call GUI mode setup, which is after the text mode. There's the GUI mode of setup, which happens before the last reboot. You can tell a command lines.txt during that space to run a command, and a GUI run once runs afterwards once the system's been logged into once. And again, I can dig into those afterwards if anybody has any questions. So when you look at imaging versus scripted installs, it can get kind of confusing if you're not really familiar with the terms. Image-based installs, basically file and disk-based duplication, the tools that a lot of people are used to for Ghost, PowerQuest. When you use a sysprep image, it creates a file-based image that you then can lay down to another system. You can use Xcopy even to do it, but the most common tools obviously are those tools I mentioned. Unattended installs, there's standard Windows setup. Only it's fully scripted or partially scripted. That's very flexible in how much you can script it. And again, I mentioned the sifs as very similar to an unattend.txt. So what I've got here is a table that, as we walk through, I'm going to try to overview how you can use each technology, some of the weak points, and we'll be checking each section as we go through. Hopefully it'll clear up any confusion, or who knows, may create some, but hopefully it'll help you all understand by the end how we try to enable each tool being used and how we see them being used. So remote installation services. Allows for a network-initiated setup. This is always a hard thing to describe. If you've never, how many of you have used Riz? Okay, so you're pretty familiar with it. For those of you who haven't, it's kind of an ethereal thing to describe, but it's using Pixie built into the network card to start a boot, and then at that boot, what we do is we actually fire off a small wizard that it initiates setup, or you can launch tools from it. We have a boot floppy that covers a limited selection of network cards that aren't covered, that aren't Pixie capable, but unfortunately it's not all-encompassing for machines that aren't Pixie capable. So how does it work? You have a client requests an IP address. The IP address gets back from DHCP server. Riz server is contacted. The server checks Active Directory, find out what should it do if it has any kind of relationship before. And depending on what it's told, it will go ahead and launch OS Choice, which is the small pseudo wizard that we run for Riz deployments. So the big thing, the enhancements that we've got coming in .NET Server, we have support for deploying all versions of Windows 2000. This is RI Setup and RI Prep, so we do a scripted and an installed base in Riz. So you can do both of those with all of the Windows 2000 products we have at retail. Windows XP Professional, we have a hotfix that'll let you do that today with Windows 2000. And also, we will be enabling this support for all 64-bit versions of Windows XP and Windows.NET. The important thing to understand there is we will only be doing the scripted support. We won't be doing the image-based support. Another great thing is we got a lot of requests for some improved performance. We've dramatically increased the performance of our TFTP daemon and the file handling for Riz within Riz. We have a tool. When you go up and you start a Riz setup, you see a wizard that offers you a bunch of images. These can be filtered depending on a bunch of things, but one thing they weren't ever filtered on before was, will this image work on my machine? I.e., can I put this down and will it ever be able to boot again? And obviously, if you can apply an image and it doesn't work, that's not a good thing because you'll wind up with a ton of support calls. So for RI Prep images, when we create the image on the server, we say this was created by an ACPI multiprocessor machine. And that won't get ever applied to a non-ACPI single processor machine where it would not boot. Hopefully that will lower support calls that, we haven't gotten tons of reports for it, but it's just something that we see as it's just an obvious thing that should be there. Auto-enter functionality in OS Choice, this one again is hard to describe, but the best way to think of it is we have this wizard today where you fill in information. And what auto-enter does is it's a small key that you put at the top of your little pages. They're HTML pages, basically. You put it at the top, and it goes ahead and it submits whatever information is on that page. So the user doesn't get a chance to enter anything, but if you have information or credentials or things there already, those will be submitted. It's like the user pressed enter, only they didn't. The net is you can run all the way through OS Chooser without touching the machine. I have an example, for example, that will start WinPE. You turn the machine on, and it goes end to end, and at the end you have a machine just running WinPE, so you don't actually have to touch the machine except to power it on. Another thing we've done is we'll have a KB out very shortly about how to enable this. The ability to specify a CIF file or a startrom.com. So I'll talk to the startrom in a second. But a CIF file, it's an unattend file. Well, obviously in an unattend, there's things like machine-specific settings. I want to install IIS on this one. I want to install DHCP on this one. You can toggle it like you can in unattend. So by saying you can put a specific CIF into Active Directory that applies to this machine, that will make that machine unique. Again, if you use the unattend functionality of OS Choice, you'll be able to install a completely unique machine without ever touching it. And you can do it repeatedly. That's one of the nice things about it. Startrom.com is not as immediate to understand, but we have a version that prompts you for F12, another one that doesn't. We have one that works with the new headless technologies and the traditional one that doesn't. So you want to be able to be flexible and say this machine, which has no KVM, I want it to use the headless, or I want all my users on the workstation to have to press F12, that kind of a thing. That's where that can really come in handy. We've got some great security enhancements as well, in addition to the version of NTLM we're using for authentication. we allow you to disable the local admin account on domain join. So as soon as the machine is joined to the domain, you can add your domain administrators, and if you set this key in the CIF file, it goes ahead and disables the local administrator account for you. It's a good security hole to cover in case you didn't apply an administrator password or you just want to lock it down and not have user access for it. The admin PW screen, again, something we didn't have in Windows 2000, the ability to put in a password for the administrator. Previously, the CIF file would say, this is the password I want for the administrator, and it applies to all of my machines. This way, if you want to give your users the authority to enter the administrator password, that can be handed up into the machine install. Secure domain join, the gist here is that you don't have credentials flying across the wire. All of the credentials for joining the machine to the domain stay local to that machine until the point in setup where it does the domain join. All of it stays in memory. Nothing is transmitted over the network. Additionally, something that's in the unattend and in the sysprep.inf and in the RIS unattends is the administrator password encryption. We allow you to encrypt the administrator password. Again, a very good thing if you're using the same administrator password across all your machines. And bad practice to not necessarily change that, but something, again, we want to be able to have it encrypted if you want to use that same password. So the key things that you need to use RIS: PC that meets PXE requirements, PXE 1 or 2 specifications, a network adapter that supports PXE or is supported by the boot floppy, and mobile systems. It's actually great. Over the past 2 years since Win2K shipped, we've seen some great work in the mobile area. You'll see systems that have mini PCI. Mini PCI, by logo requirements, is supposed to be PXE capable. So laptops 2 years ago, you couldn't do a PXE boot without a docking station, which isn't a good solution. Today you can. More and more of them have just built-in NICs that even aren't mini PCI. And there's a few card bus cards out there that will let you do PXE boot as well, but there's some unfortunate BIOS implementation things that have to happen in order to enable that. And obviously, to do an install of RIS, you need to be able to meet the minimum requirements of the OS you're installing. So the NICs that we don't support, again, these are because of BIOS implications. We can't get them supported at this low of a level. USB 1394, USB 2 NICs, and again, card bus NICs via boot floppy. We got a lot of requests to put it in the boot floppy, so you could put the boot floppy in, have it know how to go out to the card, and boot off of that, and that's a very hard solution to do. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and flip over to a demo, and what I'm going to show you is a pre-staging script. So this is the starter of where I was mentioning the CIF file and the start ROM that you can assign to your RIS server. This is basically the same idea. What I'm going to do is actually go ahead and pre-populate a bunch of machine accounts into RIS. Now where this would be useful is once you've done it, when the machines boot up, they automatically see, oh, there's a GUID up there that matches me. Let me go ahead and install based off that information. It doesn't create another machine account object. And if you don't want to have the domain join happen outside of that, that's a good way to lock down your domain infrastructure. So I'll go ahead and switch to that. It's actually my RIS server. So what you can see here, this is just a CSV file, comma separated values, that you can see these are GUIDs, theoretically globally unique IDs. Unfortunately, in machines, we've seen replicants. This is the machine name that I'm going to assign to that GUID. This is, for my own purposes, where the data center is. I'm going to put the machine. This is the user who I want to have permission to reset that machine account when he's joining the machine. And then the description that I want to have appear in Active Directory. Let me close that. And this is a fun-filled wish script, and we'll be making this available, and the script should actually work on Win2K RIS servers as well as .NET servers. So our hope is to actually get this out during one of the release candidates for .NET Server, and you can use it for your existing machines as well. So you can see over here, I've got no machines in my computer's OU. Load that. I'm going to add 7 machine accounts to Active Directory. Okay. So I created them successfully. Fortunately, I don't have a macro to refresh. But you can see I've got 7 machine accounts there. And in this case, when I boot that machine up next, it knows to assign, based on that globally unique ID, it knows to assign this specific information to it. So it's a really good way to pre-stage your machines in Active Directory. So let me switch back to the PowerPoint demo. So where does it get the globally unique IDs from? I'll go ahead and answer this one since it's really quick. GUIDs are actually stored in the SM BIOS of your hardware. So they're stored at a very low level that traditionally you can't get to, like through software. But one of the native things about Pixie is you're allowed to transmit that over the wire as part of the Pixie packet. So it's actually burned into the SM BIOS of the machine. And again, it's part of the Pixie implementation and part of SM BIOS. So it's not supported by all hardware. So let me actually skip down, make sure I start in the same place. That's your question. Pardon? No. That's not the Windows GUID in Active Directory. No, it's entirely different than the Windows GUID. Need to do this better. I'll talk to it afterwards because there actually is. So during Q&A we'll talk to it. So Riz, you can see the uses that we see for it, and it's important. The check with an asterisk means it works kind of, or moreover in the case of Riz or SysPrep, it works when you use it one way. So I'll walk through this. So you can see bare metal. That's just what Riz does well. We don't do upgrades. We do bare metal installs, so you can do pre-staging, things like that. Hence, upgrades isn't checked. Do pre-staging, as I showed you in Active Directory. Do dissimilar hardware. Again, that's one of the differences. Can we actually hold it to the end? I'd like to really cover all the questions, but I just want to make sure we get all the content covered. So dissimilar hardware is, if you use an RI setup, a scripted install, dissimilar hardware will generally work. If you use an image-based install, again, the same limitations of the HAL and mass storage, you're going to have to be careful about how you apply that image down to another machine. By centralized install point, this is, again, a hard thing to fit into a small space. One of the nice things about Riz is if you've used it as your core, you can update that image in one place, and then when your users decide to wipe their machines or you have them wipe their machines clean, then you get a clean install from your install point. So if you've changed from SP1 to SP2 of your operating system, everyone who installs from that install point gets Service Pack 2. A little easier to do than making sure that everybody threw away that Service Pack 1 slipstream CD. Again, OS and apps together, same thing. Scripted, it's kind of a challenge. You can do a GUI run once after setup and do some application installs if the app supports a scripted install. If it doesn't, then you may have to do an image install if it supports imaging. And again, the same applies to SysPrep, as we'll see in a minute. 2 partitions. Again, you can do this afterwards and it can work, but I didn't feel it was fair to check it here because it's an exceeding challenge to try and get more than one partition working on a Riz server. On the clients that it deploys, actually. Easy to reconfigure. What I meant by this is it's easy for you to take your image. So you have IIS running and you decide, I don't want IIS in my baseline image, or I want SMTP in all of my baseline images. You can easily add that in an RI setup image. It's just like adding a line to your unattend.txt. In an image-based install, an RI prep image, it's not as easy to add because, again, you have to install it, deinstall whatever OC you don't want there, and then capture that RI prep image again. It's not that flexible. Requires Active Directory, depending on which side of the fence you're on. That's a good thing. It's a bad thing. One thing we've seen a lot of customers do is just, if they're interested in Riz, they'll actually set up a standalone Active Directory DC or even set up their Riz server as the Active Directory domain controller. That can work as well. SysPrep, the system preparation tool, the full name everybody talks to, it prepares a system. So it goes through and does things like cleans up SIDs, system identifiers, cleans up everything in the system that we know to be unique to that system, which is then repopulated the next time you boot that system. A lot of that is unique information, and we will rebuild it the next time the system is booted. And what it does is you could use something as simple as Xcopy, especially now Xcopy has a /O, so you can copy from an NTFS to an NTFS and keep ACLs that you had on the image. But more often, you're going to find it used with a third-party imaging tool. And the code is actually very similar to RIPrep. So if you're used to RIPrep, SysPrep should come very easily, and vice versa. Requires relatively similar hardware. Again, there's no way for us to do the things we do with RIS today, where you take HALs and compare them. So you want to make sure that either all of your machines can work with that image, that storage controller, those kinds of things. It's a little bit more flexible as far as a storage controller from XP and .NET, but it's still something you have to bear in mind today. So it can't self-heal itself. And what happens is, it's actually a misnomer, it runs mini setup after it has applied the image down to the server. Windows Welcome is only a Windows XP thing. So things that we've done as an enhancement to SysPrep, one of the things is we have a dash factory switch, which allows you to go out over the network and update files. And the key things there would be drivers, possibly applications, things that you want local to the machine to run after SysPrep has completed its work, or during SysPrep's PNP work. One of the other key improvements is SysPrep can now image a .NET server that is running IIS. An important clarification is that we can't, SysPrep and RIPrep can't correctly image a machine that's running Windows 2000 that has IIS on it. When you recreate that machine, theoretically, IIS may or may not work. We don't support it because it's really broken. I can talk to anybody who's curious about that one afterwards, but generally .NET servers and Windows XP were the first time that will support SysPrep on or IIS on a SysPrep system. And WinBomb.ini also allows you to go out and gather those files and bring them back during factory. And many of you may or may not be familiar with the -PNP switch. It's a switch that tends to add a lot of time to SysPrep. That's no longer necessary. We do a lot of the PNP work for you. So unless you have a piece of older hardware that's not detected, you can leave the -PNP switch out if you're used to putting it into your builds. So how does it work? Here's a really simple example. You've got your source machine, which is the machine you're going to be SysPrepping, and you'll go ahead and prepare it exactly as you want it with Windows and any applications that are imageable. You start SysPrep on the machine, which then, if it's ACPI, it'll power itself off, or else it'll tell you to power itself off. In this case, I'll use WinPE as an imaging tool. You'd actually copy the image. Say we could use Xcopy here to copy it over to the server. The new machine below is booted using WinPE, and you could again copy the image over from there. And the new machine is powered on and mini setup runs. And the new machine is then ready to distribute. You could either distribute before or after mini setup is run. And then you can repeat, obviously, steps 4 through 6 as many times for as many machines as you want to deploy using SysPrep, using that same image. So SysPrep, again, bare metal. It allows you to do that imaging from machine to machine. You obviously can't take a SysPrep image from one machine and apply it to another. The end result will be that old image crushed on top of or that new image crushed on top of the old one, i.e. it won't work. There's no upgrade version of SysPrep. It's an image-based tool and allows you to do the OS and apps together, and that's the great thing about SysPrep, is that it lets you take those applications with the operating system and deploy them as one. The unattended file, it's, again, very common today. Setup Manager, a tool that we put in the deploy cab. It's been in the deploy cab on the product CD since, I know since Windows 2000, and it's in XP, and it'll be in Windows.NET, and our documentation, I think, has greatly improved since Windows 2000. Instead of a doc file, there's a great compressed HTML help file in there that answers most questions about unattended files. And again, that's under support tools in the product CDs in XP and in Windows 2000 as well. So again, allows you to encrypt the local administrator password, which I mentioned earlier. Setup Manager, we've got an improved interface. This is actually improved since Windows XP. So if you took a look at Windows XP, we had improved it a little bit since Windows 2000. And we did, I think, quite a bit of just overall look and feel improvement. It's easier to use. the version of Setup Manager that will be shipping in .NET Server and that will be backward compatible to XP. And another thing that we've added is the ability to configure some commonly used optional components. So we see things like IIS, like all the different subcomponents of IIS, terminal services, things like that people routinely add to their unattend files. And we see one of the most common mistakes in an unattend file is a typo. So if we go ahead and add it for you, we at least know it's spelled right, and then you don't have to hassle with it, and you just click a button and click Next, and that optional component is added for you. So hopefully it'll help you deploy a little bit easier, a little bit faster, and not have to worry about spelling. And again, the help file is on the CD in that cab file as well. So unattend, you can do bare metal with it. You can do upgrades in a sense because you can pass a whack unattend with a file, but I added this on the advice of someone else. I'm on the fence as to really say, because what it'll do is it'll grab things that it can apply. It won't apply everything. It will apply what it can. It doesn't really do everything that you tell it to. Allows you to do dissimilar hardware setups, and like I said, easy to reconfigure. In that sense, you can add optional components really easily to it. You can take those pre-existing unattend files, put them into Setup Manager. It allows you to open existing ones and modify those as you want. So custom CD, this is something we get a lot of requests for. I want to take that CD that you guys shipped on, in the RTM. I want to take that, but I want my unattend file, or I have this driver I have to add to it, or I just need to change it a little bit. So the ability to create a custom CD, you can create an ISO image using tools that we provide within WinPE. And that's the mechanism to get those tools and how they are supported as well. So it allows you to put custom drivers, a custom unattend file. There's one we put on the CD already. And you can also hook into it by saying you're adding a GUI run once or command lines.txt. Say if you want to run antivirus tool install right after setup is completed installing. So custom CD, again, allows you to do bare metal, upgrades in a way, allows you to do dissimilar hardware, and it is relatively easy to configure. Unlike an unattend, it usually means burning an image, therefore trashing a CD if you don't get it right the first time. So it's incrementally more difficult than a traditional unattend on a floppy. So WinPE, Windows PE. How many of you have heard of WinPE? It's more than I expected. WinPE is a tool that we shipped in with Windows XP. It shipped the day that Windows XP Professional released to manufacturing. And it makes Riz look easy to explain. It's basically a version of XP Professional that we've gone through and we pare down and remove things that you don't need. The PE stands for pre-installation environment. So it's designed to be that stable OS before you apply anything else. So you boot into WinPE, and then you would do whatever imaging work you need. And I'll go through here and show you how we would do that. But command shell, for example, cmd.exe is your shell. There's no Explorer. There's very limited functionality there. What we've done is taken the Win32 API and pared it down so you have just the things that you need to do pre-installation. It's not designed to be a thin client. It's totally different than Windows XP Embedded by design. It's not supposed to be an embedded environment. It's for pre-installs. So we have a 32 and a 64-bit version. So we have our version that will work on iX86 machines and a version that will work with the Intel Titanium platform. It's really designed to replace DOS, hence the line above. See, we have a 64-bit version. Places where you'd use DOS today, you can switch to Windows PE and use WinNT32 scripted setup, or use an imaging tool, or even Xcopy. So it is scriptable in the sense that you can run batch files. We have optional components that you can add to it, which I'll talk to in a second. But you can run command scripts that can do things for you, and I'll demonstrate that in just a second. The winbomb.ini, again, you saw me mention that earlier. It's sort of a to-do list. You can tell it things such as, I want to use, if you don't have a DHCP enabled, we use DHCP by default for networking. If you don't have DHCP, you can tell it to use an IP address, to use a certain subnet mask, a limited set of functionality for networking, things like that. You can give it commands for doing the partitioning work for you, etc. So it's sort of a bill of materials, hence the name WinBomb. the big win here is that it gives you everything that you had in XP as far as drivers. So instead of going back with your DOS tools and trying to find support from network card vendor X for your advanced, gigabit card in DOS 6 or Caldera DOS or DR DOS or whatever, you can use WinPE. If it's supported in XP, supported in .NET, it's supported in WinPE. Right now, coming up with the story of how we make the .NET server drivers available in WinPE, but this is something we'll be enabling. Right now, it's the XP drivers that are in there natively. So all mass storage drivers, all network drivers, and we actually use a VESA video driver. So we try to be as hardware ambivalent as we can. We come up, as you'll see here, it's really low color in my machine, but we'll come up in as high color as we can. You'll generally get all the way up to 16-bit color at 1024 by 768 resolution if the machine's BIOS supports it, but otherwise we fail down. And that means you don't have to have all the video drivers on the CD with you. And to answer the question that will inevitably come up, we're about 120 megs on disk. So the big thing is we're hardware independent. You can take this CD and I can put it in this machine and it'll boot. I can put it in my other laptop, it'll boot. I can generally put it in any iX86 machine that would support Windows XP, and it just works. Allows you to have TCP/IP networking support. Allows you to script to our built-in drive configuration tools, DiskPart, which shipped in XP and will be in .NET Server. Format, fully scriptable again. And the key thing here, as I'll show you in just a second, these are fast. Unlike the tools that we always had before, where you'd sit there at fdisk and wait, and wait, and wait, now you can use the 32-bit tools that we make available natively in the OS and just script to them and do your work for you. And the process, as you'll see, is considerably faster. So you can crank out a lot more machines faster, also turn a machine around a lot faster. And we have 4 boot methods we support. There's actually 3, depending on how you squint and look at it. The first one is we do support booting off of a Pixie server. It's important. The only one we support today is Riz. It's just the only one we've been able to test to get working correctly. We support a hard drive-based boot, and we support CD/DVD boot. CD, it's just there. DVD, we support it, but unfortunately it has to be an ISO formatted DVD, so it's not a UDF, not a DVD in the eyes of the DVD consortium, unfortunately. So how does it work? Here's a scenario of how you'd actually use it. Just a second. So the machine is booted with WinPE. We could be using any of the others. Let's just say we're booting it through CD here. You'd prepare the disk using DiskPart, fully scripted. You'd format the disk using Format, again, fully scripted. You can go out and, since you've got network connectivity and the drivers for your NIC, you go out and connect to your network share, grab your image that you want to apply down to the machine. Again, it could be using an imaging tool, it could be using Xcopy. The image is actually applied to the machine, or WinNT32 is launched. Again, we can do either one. So with that, I'll go ahead and I will demo WinPE, and it's actually booting off of a CD rather than a DVD. Let me shift over to a different machine here. 9. So this machine, just pretend it's a server. This machine is set to hard drive boot, Pixie boot, now hard drive boot, then CD boot, and then floppy boot, and I can't remember the rest of the chain. But the point is here, it's set to hard drive boot. But I've wiped the disk, which is kind of how you get it from your OEM. You get a machine that has a raw disk, or you'd wipe it clean yourself and start over. So here I've booted to the hard drive. It failed to boot from the hard drive, so it's booting from the CD, which is the next thing in the boot order. It's an important thing to ask from an OEM if this is the way you want to boot your machines. And the neat thing is that once we've laid down the MBR and applied and started WinNT32, which I'll do in this case, you're going to go ahead and start off the hard drive next time, so it won't boot to WinPE. It's kind of a neat little boot trick. We've also added a switch to DiskPart that'll be in the .NET servers as well for inactive, which allows you to flip-flop. So you could actually say, I don't want the MBR on this machine to boot anymore, so fail over and do CD or Pixie boot. So I'm booting off the CD, hence the reason it's a little bit slower than off of a traditional hard drive boot. Takes a second or 3. So what we're doing here is we're doing everything from P&P, you know, trying to get the networking drivers, trying to get the hard drive mass storage, the traditional things that you would see in what we always call text mode setup, the stuff that was blue during setup of Windows 2000 and NT, and so we go ahead and skip in, and you'll see a color that's very familiar if you've ever used NT4. And we fail back to this. It's actually a much prettier shade of blue if you've got BASIS support, and then we actually show a bitmap on most of our default installs. So the speed actually is, it goes as follows. And if you wanted to compare the boot times, DVD boot, unfortunately, is by far the slowest. CD boot is then the second slowest by a long margin. It's a lot faster. Pixie boot, actually hard drive boot is the next, and that can take about a minute. And then a Pixie boot is on a 100 meg network is actually very fast. More machines, obviously, you boot off of it. We keep handles back open to the server, so the more machines you boot, the slower it tends to get. So I have, since I have a raw disk here, I have a side-by-side CD with Windows.NET Server on it. So I've written a batch script. All I do is type serve. We're going to create the partition. This is, again, a raw disk, so no partitions defined. Selected the partition, assigned the drive letter, made it active, do a quick format in NTFS. It's a 9 gig disk. This operation here takes a little bit of time. It's an older machine. On faster, newer machines, it actually doesn't take very long. An important thing to note there is that we've done, you know, I've just created a 9 gig NTFS volume, which using DOS, you would have been out of luck without some kind of a growth tool, something that lets you grow your NTFS partitions automatically. So I've launched WinNT32, and it's important that you have the syspart and temp drive switches to it, because we've just defined where that partition sits. The machine, the registry no longer exists on that machine, so it doesn't know where to actually go to install the operating system. So I tell it syspart, system drive letter, temp drive, system drive letter, and pass it the keys it needs to go ahead and install. And with that, since I've actually said to copy it local, this machine will actually take a fair amount of time to finish booting, provided it's not home. But there we go. And you'll see that I've done the same thing I would do on an upgrade for a Windows 2000 machine. I've launched WinNT32 rather than the legacy WinNT that you'd use off of boot floppies or off of a DOS floppy. So, again, a significant performance increase there. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on, and if you have any questions about this, we'll go ahead and cover those at the end. So WinPE, again, it's a great bare metal tool. You get a new machine from an OEM or you want to wipe a machine, it lets you go ahead and do what you need to do to get that machine ready. Dissimilar hardware, again, it's flexible. If you want to do image-based, you're not flexible. If you want to do unattend-based, like I just did here, then you're as flexible as your unattend is. And then the same applies for image-based. Centralized install point, theoretically, you can do this because you could actually support Pixie booting WinPE off of a RIS server, going out to a scripted unattend or a scripted network share and doing your install point from out there. So you can get that centralized install point effect without actually using RIS itself for your installations. It allows you to do the OS and apps together if you're doing that sysprep-based install. Does let you do 2 partitions. This is actually an interesting thing that you can, using diskpart, it's obviously as flexible as you are at writing the diskpart script. So you've got a machine with 20 volumes, use diskpart to create those 20 volumes. You can go ahead and do that, and diskpart is a very flexible tool as far as creating those volumes for you. And your limits are, unlike a DOS boot floppy, your limits are the limits of Windows NT's own NTFS infrastructure. So the FAT32 NTFS implementation limits still apply, but you don't have anything lower than that. And again, it's easy to reconfigure if you've based it on an unattended file. So group policy and SMS, how can they play a role in your deployment infrastructure? Unlike the tools I've mentioned thus far, which really focus on clean install, group policy and SMS are really great tools that snap in if you're trying to upgrade your existing clients. So you've already got machines running Windows 98, Windows 2000, etc., and you want to upgrade those machines to Windows XP. One of the great things that SMS can do is it can actually go out and using WinNT32, it can query and find out if those machines are hardware, software, capable of running Windows XP or Windows.NET Server using the WinNT32 from those operating systems. So it allows you to query beforehand, before the user has installed it, and before you've broken their machine, so to let you know about any incompatibilities. That's where something like SMS is great as far as doing inventory for you. And they're also great at doing the operating system upgrade, so hot fixes, service packs. And the tools I mentioned up front aren't great at maintenance. They're great at deployment, and you can maintain them and keep the new operating system image on them, but group policy and SMS will more so allow you to push out the updates that you need rather than having to do a complete wipe and reload to upgrade to a service pack, which is pretty nonsensical. Again, using SMS, unlike the tools I mentioned previously, you could build in an inventory system that would tell you if it's completed successfully, but generally SMS is going to be far better at telling you the upgrade completed successfully. It's better at logging events. That's what it does. It's a maintenance tool or management tool. And again, it lets you inventory before it's too late. So the key things there, you can see it conflicts. It covers the rest of those bases that the other tools I mentioned didn't. Things like upgrades, allows you to do pre-staging. You could either use Riz for your pre-staging or using SMS or group policy per OU or per machine, push out that upgrade to that specific machine or machines. Dissimilar hardware, again, it's as flexible as your upgrade mechanism. Centralized install points, kind of inherent in the architecture of SMS or group policy. You control what you're pushing out, so you have that centralized install point. Lets you do the operating system and apps together. Again, you can push out an image, or more often using things like group policy or SMS, you would actually push out the applications that you want to end up on the user's desktop, again, depending on what you want them to have on their desktop or on a server. As far as configurability, it's as configurable, again, as your installation method. So if you're using an unattend to push that out, again, you can modify your unattend to do specific things. If requiring Active Directory, SMS has no requirement on Active Directory. Group policy does require Active Directory, so using the two together would obviously require Active Directory. So as an example here of how you would use several of the tools I've mentioned together, you'd actually, let's say we have a client, a Riz server, and a file server. So the machine, the client, will launch WinPE over the network. That's a clean machine, nothing on it. We launch it using Pixie. So we prepare the disk automatically, just as I did here, using disk part format. And let's say we're going to apply an image using xcopy. So we use xcopy/o over the network, grab an image file by file, a little slow, and apply it down to the client. Sysprep mini setup completes, which we could have automated using a sysprep.inf file, which can automate as much as you want it to. In this case, let's say the machine is going to use an auto log on. So you put an administrator password in, it's going to log on once for you, and here it's going to run GUI run once to install SQL Server, which you could use an ISS file to install for you. So it gives a kind of an example of how you could use all those tools together. There's a couple of things I like to cover as far as how they can play a role, and when you're looking at a deployment tool, how it can affect you, how it can affect your customers that you're working with. Just a couple of parameters that you like to bear in mind as you're looking at a customer scenario or solution. The geography that a customer is based in. You know, when you look at, if you go to Linda Apsley's presentation, you'll see a great outlay of what our internal infrastructure looks like. All these things that you have to take into account when you're actually doing a deployment within an infrastructure. You want to know how geography is going to play a role. Can I put a server here and have it service over there? Those kinds of things. Time zones can actually play an interesting role. This plays more into terminal services than anything else, but time zones can also play a role in deployment. If I put something here and it has to deploy over there, but they get in at different times. Is this just going to absolutely thrash my network because they're doing that at a different time than I expect? So time zones, time differences are important to bear in mind. Bandwidth, latency between sites. Do you have a satellite link? Do you have just a 64K connection, whatever? Hardware homogeneity and lifespan. This is hard to cover as well, but basically there's obviously, within any company, you've got a lifetime for a machine. It could be a year, could be 5 years, could be 8 years. You have a lifespan that hardware is designed to go. And that can affect how similar your machines are. And depending on how tight your processes are for acquiring that hardware can also make differences as far as how homogeneous the machines are. This can really play in when you're trying to do image-based deployment. How can I do image-based deployment if I don't know if all of my machines are APIC compatible, or if they're only ACPI, or if they're all single product, multi-product, etc. You've got all these variables that you have to throw into the fray, and if you don't know your hardware infrastructure or the infrastructure of your customer, it can really add a lot of time to the deployment process. The existing hardware, again, you want to know what the infrastructure looks like from a machine, network, low-level network infrastructure, existing software that's out there, because obviously you're going to need to, in a migration, a lot of customers are going from 98 to XP. There's just some software that doesn't migrate well in that scenario. So you need to be aware of those things before you migrate to the NT-based operating system from a 9X operating system. Management software that may already be deployed can help you do things like that. And then you want to bear in mind what the support infrastructure is. You don't want to implement a deployment process that's really hands-on and really tedious, that you have to handhold your users if you don't have the support infrastructure to handle it. Obviously, if you barely have a guy there answering phone service for 5,000 people, you want a process that works great end-to-end and does as much work as possible for them. So support infrastructure can definitely play a role in your deployment process. So I feel it's also important to emphasize what we've done in .NET Server to enable 64-bit deployment. So 64-bit, if you have XP SP1, you will be able to deploy from a .NET Server. We will not be making that available in Windows 2000, unfortunately. So to boot a 64-bit client, you will need to have a .NET RIS server. Again, that's using RI setup, not using RI prep. So think scripted, not image-based. 64-bit Windows.NET servers can serve as RIS servers. Probably a pretty uncommon scenario, but you can do it if you want to. Sysprep, unattended setup, again, all fully functional on the 64-bit platform. Obviously, you want to make sure that an optional component, when you go from here to here, understand that it may or may not be there. So if your unattend doesn't work, it may actually be because the component isn't on the 64-bit version. WinPE, again, one of the key points that we've done is we've enabled that for the 64-bit platforms as well. So Windows product activation. This is a point that's come up quite a bit. There's a couple of key things to bear in mind. What we've done is when you have volume licensed media, you don't have to do activation, and you have a unique product key that applies across all of your installs for your licensed base. So that means you don't have to come up with an interesting way to script it. You don't have to put it in manually. You don't have to do anything special to put it there. However, given that inherent value, a concern that we've seen raised quite a bit was, well, that's great. I've got this mystical, magical key. How can I protect it? Because it's generally just sitting there in your unattended files. So for Service Pack 1 and in the RTM version of Windows.NET Server, you will be able to encrypt that product key. So for volume product keys, you can actually encrypt it into the unattended CIF or INF file that you're using for your unattended setup. And that will generally mean that it is as protected as you can make it, given that all of your users have to have read access to see it. So we think that'll help alleviate some of the pain that some of you may be seeing about volume product keys. Retail media, you do still have to activate, and you do have to have a unique product key for every install that you do. It's important to note that there is a scripting mechanism that it uses Windows Management Instrumentation and Windows Script Host, and it will will stuff the product key into the product for you. If you're interested in that, I can send you, I can give you the pointer to a white paper that we have that describes how you do that. Again, what we generally emphasize is that even for open customers, and you can find some documentation on this out at Microsoft.com, we really emphasize that Windows product activation doesn't have to be a problem for corporate customers, because even in an open license, which only requires 5 licenses, you can get volume product. So even small customers can get access to the volume product key, and it doesn't have to play a burden in their deployment process. So we're still working out the fine details, but one of the things that we're planning on within the year, I have an update here, within the year we're planning on, it's still to be defined where it will sit. It'll probably be either on Microsoft.com or up on TechNet. We're going to have a Windows deployment website, basically an area of Microsoft.com that is really focused on the deployment of Windows and likely the deployment of Office as well. The key things that we want to do is we want to be able to take, again, some of this will be there, and probably a little bit even more in-depth for people who really want to dig into how SysPrep works and why it does certain things and doesn't do other things. But what do I use, when, why, how would you use a certain tool, why wouldn't a certain tool work for another scenario? Riz tools, the script that I showed you, though we will be making it available in a KB before this site goes live, we'll be putting this out there. Again, another thing that we've gotten a lot of requests for is people want to do a test. They want to take a bare machine and they want it to be a Riz, DHCP, and Active Directory controller, because they want to just see how Riz works. And if you've never done it before, it can be a daunting process to set that whole infrastructure up, whether it's on 3 machines or 1. So we'll be writing a script that does that for you. And again, the pre-staging script I showed you, the ability to remove machines, so you put the machines into Active Directory like I showed. Well, it'd be great if you could go in and say, well, I actually put that one in by mistake, but I have the script here, so go up, grab it, and pull it for me based on the global unique ID. Again, just some general management tools that'll help with Riz infrastructure and with Active Directory infrastructure by tangent. Some SysPrep and deployment tools, primarily additional docs and tools that either we've written internally or have helped consultants or have been written by consultants that we think will help in deploying and figuring out what to use for deployment. So to sum it up, we think you probably get by using the tool that works best for your own needs at hand. We've got a bunch of tools that work in certain scenarios. We understand that not one tool does everything, but we hope that the tools that we've given cover as many bases as possible. There's no predetermined right solution. When I talk to customers, it's kind of funny because, don't be funny, haha, but I feel bad because I feel like we've perplexed them, because I'll get a call from this customer and they'll say, well, I'm using Riz for this. Am I wrong? Should I be using something else? And they feel bad because they feel like they're using the tool the wrong way. And there is no wrong way. If it works for you and it gets more deployment, gets your deployment process smoothed out, that's all that counts. So devising a deployment strategy that works for you fits hand in hand right with that. We feel we've made some huge improvements in XP and Windows.net that should really help with deployment. And we think that where it fits, which again it doesn't tend to be the small enterprise, where it fits, WinPE can really help unblock a lot of deployment issues. So with that, I'll go over a couple of resources I recommend. Again, the Deploy Cab. If you haven't explored the Deploy Cab lately, it's got some great documentation. It's obviously version specific, so if you're looking for stuff for Windows 2000, look on that product CD, because there's going to be some stuff on XP that wouldn't apply, and on .NET Server Betas that wouldn't apply. So look at the version that you're using. Same with SysPrep. Use the version that applies for that. But Deploy Cab has gotten some great improvements in XP, and we'll have some more in .NET. This is one, try not to be biased, this is one of a couple of books that I've seen on Windows deployment. Does a really good mid-level overview of deployment tools, again, summarizing some of the stuff I've talked about here. There's a great series, I don't know how many they did, there were at least 3 in what was then called Windows 2000 magazine on Riz, and I believe these are still available in their online archive. I don't know if you have to pay for that or not, but beginning with a summary of how Riz worked all the way up into how to deploy other operating systems with it. Kind of a neat overview. TechNet, there's some great deployment resources, and again, I can get you some URLs if you're interested in digging deep on that, but even TechNet has our traditional search engine, so you can really dig deep with that. And it's hard to find stuff, but the knowledge base also has a ton of really great articles. So if you hit something like a Stop 7B, go up to the KB, and you can find out generally what's causing that and how to alleviate it. There's some common issues that we've really tried to cover in the knowledge base. So with that, I'll go ahead and wrap up, and we'll open it up for a good 15 minutes of questions. All right. Sure.
How do you guys handle that? Do you assume that exists?
All right. So the question is this. Traditionally today, there's obviously that first step when you get a server. You want to do some low-level configuration, RAID, storage, that kind of thing, that you would traditionally boot to a DOS floppy or some other tool and do that. Today, we do not have a tool that will work on WinPE to do that. However, we are trying to work with OEMs to get their tools to work in WinPE so you can just boot to WinPE and do that same configuration there. But right now, you still have to do that pre-configuration, and then you can boot to WinPE to do your OS laydown, to do an unattended setup, do higher level disk partitioning and things like that. And I think we actually have some .NET improvements there, but I'm not the right person to speak to them, unfortunately.
Theoretically, I could do some manual stuff. Like on my WinPE CD, I can include stuff utilities from Compact, write my own scripts, basically run that, configure the array, and then do your network.
Right, provided those tools had a Win32-based interface and could run under WinPE, which I'm not sure where their status is, whether they're interested, but I know today I think they're DOS-based, aren't they? Yeah. So today you couldn't take those compact Smart Start tools and just copy them over and work there. We don't, for example, to save space, we don't have the, I don't want to call it the thunking layer, but we don't have the WoW32 on the 32-bit and the WoW64 on the 64-bit. So 32-bit is 32-bit, and 64 you can only run 64-bit apps. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Two questions about Riz. When or if are you guys going to plan to support slipstreaming of the Riz images with Service Packs? And what tools, if any, have you made improvements for managing my worldwide deployment of Riz servers to keep them all in sync, and how I manage my Riz environment?
I'm going to remember you. So the question is, I've got a ton of images on my Riz server. How can I maintain them and keep them deployed consistently when I've got 100 Riz servers throughout the world? I wish I had better news. Unfortunately, today there is not a plan to allow slipstreaming of RI setup or RI prepped builds. I'm still trying my best to get support for the RI setup stuff in the future, and that is infinitely easier than ever considering anything in RI prep images. But even getting RI setup images I know would be a huge improvement. So my hope is that we will have something. It may arrive in a service pack someday, but today, unfortunately, there's no plan for the RTM version. And as far as maintenance of images, we're working with the SMS team to have their tools be more easily able to do the replication job for us instead of, say, relying on things like FRS to do the deployment from
Few customers are having deployed SMS. What else? What are my other options? Not everybody's got SMS.
I know. And the basic thing there is, right, Riz is a file base. So if you have a replication tool that knows NTFS to NTFS, it should work. That's the big question. So if you have a favorite tool that does that, we have a couple of tools internally that could be used that are basically derivations of Xcopy, which is obviously not the right solution for the job. But I unfortunately don't have a good answer for you there. I know it's a problem, and unfortunately it's something I heard through several RAPs and several JDPs, but it's a hard problem to solve. So I can maybe answer some more afterwards. We can see if we can come up with something.
WinPE, is that available now?
Yes, WinPE is available now. We have a couple of different versions. If you're an ISV and you want to develop a tool that embeds WinPE into your application/tool, so you want to sell it at retail and have WinPE be your underlying operating system/environment, then you'd want to use the ISV version that we have. And if you're interested in that, just send an email to winpe@microsoft.com and they'll get back in touch with you. They're pretty good about that. If you're a corp and you're interested in deploying it internally, there's a couple of different options available. We have Microsoft Consulting Services has started using it in their operations. So if you have an MCS on site, they can build a solution for you. Or we've also made it available to enterprise agreement customers and select customers with software assurance membership. So it's just part of software assurance now. So it's included in there. Mm-hmm.
Another question. How does this, the APF, I've heard a bit about it.
How does WinPE, I take it you're asking?
Or whichever piece of it.
Okay. How do the tools that I documented here speak to APF, which is the Automated Provisioning Framework that some of you may have heard of? I don't think Mike is doing a session here, but I believe there's actually some documentation on Microsoft.com about APF for those of you who haven't heard of it or want to dig a little bit deeper. Long term, I think they may be looking at using WinPE as their base, but APF is more of an overall, like MOF, it's an overall framework. So it's taking these tools and building something with it. So, right. So long term, you might see something there that actually implements it, but I don't believe. That's sort of the unattended aspects of it, and then eventually maybe the WinPE aspects of it. It's sort of still on a separate path. Again, it's an MCS-based solution. Yes. Sorry, speed differences in RIS? So there's a couple of things with regards to speed differences. There's a little bit of an improvements in the speed of TFTPD, but the big one and the most important improvement is the scalability of TFTPD. Rather than 15 to 20 machines, we expect you should be able to get up to about 60 or 70 machines installing simultaneously, which is an order of magnitude better. Again, it's not thousands, but short of multicast, which we don't support, there's not much. In a unicast environment, you're limited as to what you can do, but we think that should really help in deployment. Did that answer your question? Yes, sir. Will the next version of SMS, codenamed Topaz, be able to do bare metal deployment? And unfortunately, I'm not the right person to talk to about that. While I do talk to the Topaz guys pretty regularly, I'm not up on what their grand plans are. So I can get you a contact if you're interested in digging into that one a little bit. You can come up here afterwards and I can point you his way. Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay, the question was, okay, I can buy 5 user licenses and kill off the need to do activation. I can get my volume product and I can deploy without entering that product key. Is it valid to, or is it legal to wipe out my OEM installation with that volume media? I believe, I can't testify to this, but I believe it is legal. However, in doing so, you would likely void your OEM warranty. So that's the big barrier there. You're going to want to maintain, if you've done, like you bought a new brand X laptop, you're going to want to make sure that you're not going to completely wipe out your warranty support by putting that media on it. But that's just something that comes into play. Did that answer your question? Okay. You actually had a...
I think you're saying in one of the scenarios that you load up WinPE across the network and then you use some tool such as Xcopy or some image tool to download the image. Are you saying that something like that would run on?
So the question is, I've mentioned Xcopy or imaging tools on WinPE. and without really mentioning those tools. So we don't really have an announcement per se, but I've gotten approval from both companies that we can sort of say that PowerQuest and Symantec will both, within the next year, be releasing versions of WinPE compatible tools. They definitely have plans of doing it. I believe both are on short-term rather than long-term goals. But there are definitely plans for both of those companies, and I'm not aware of any other companies that are interested in doing it thus far. If you are one of those companies, is that? Yes, we are doing our due diligence to evangelize it out to them, and the primary thing has been getting them to understand really what WinPE is and how it can help them. So, but we are seeing a lot of interest there, and what's been great is, as we've done corporate deployments both during the JDP and during the rapid adoption program of Windows XP, we saw a lot of interest from corporate customers like, well, this is just great. Now, what do I need to do to get Symantec put Ghost, or get PowerQuest, or get this vendor to put their imaging tool on top of it? So we do expect those before too long. Mm-hmm.
So does earlier a quick little CSV file with GUIDs and
Mm-hmm.
to be able to populate the AE to take advantage of the policies for stuff.
Right.
You also mentioned there's an easier way to get rather than BIOS 12 or whatever you can find there.
I have a feeling you'd haunt me on that one. So the question is, if you've ever tried to get an SM BIOS GUID out of a machine, it's hard. So, right. Well, the thing is, if you've got an operating system on it, it's actually, if you've got Windows 2000 or anything newer from us, it's really easy. There's actually a WMI provider that'll go down, grab it, and bring it back out for you. Unfortunately, that kind of defeats the purpose if you're doing a clean install or if you don't even have an operating system on the machine. So we have, again, another tool we'll be trying to provide. We have a creative MCS who has made a low-level SM BIOS query tool. So what you'll actually be able to do is boot into WinPE and just run this exe, and it goes down, grabs the SM BIOS GUID for you, and it will report it back to you. So you could then base it off of that. That's one way. The other way, especially if you're a valued customer of your OEM, is to request it. We originally had asked that they be proactive and put it on the outside of the carton that the box ships in, that your computer ships in. Unfortunately, that's not the best place to put it on a machine that's going to be sitting around for 5 or 6 years or longer, because you throw the carton away.
You also mentioned that while the WinPE is only available if you're an ISV and you're interested in it, or else if you have MCS on contract or part of enterprise agreements.
Right.
Part is a good job of getting help with that there.
Sorry, what was it?
You mentioned that the build-up utility MCS guy came up with. So you'd be able to get contracts.
No, actually, I think they're even planning on making that available through PSS. But yeah, again, that's only under WinPE. There is a tool that I believe he may have actually even looked at before he did his. There's a tool from IBM. It's a DOS-based tool that will do it as well. So you can boot off of a floppy and do the query. If you stop by and give me a card afterwards, I'll see if I can't point you that way. So, what was that? WinBIOS. Okay. Yes. I think you had a question.
What's the support for .NET once it's finally released, script up on like a website? Is that a proactive thing that Microsoft's going to do? Or, because a lot of times, our businesses script not trying to share it about the next gig.
Right, and I think one of the things that we're trying to do, I know I've been trying to do it, is participate a lot more in our community, in our developer community, and for me, in our deployment community. I started in deployment almost 2 years ago now, started in the Windows team, and in that time, it's really allowed me to see, as a corporate evangelist, how we sort of leave the corporate world out in the cold too often, and I don't like that. So one of the things that I really want to try to do is proactively drive content out there. Again, we're trying to get people more involved in the Usenet communities that we've got, and I do have a lot of backing from our marketing arm and from a couple of vice presidents that are interested in making sure that this is the right thing for us to do. So I'm hoping that you won't see this vision disappear. Let me put it that way. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I understand the fascination with GUIDs, that it's actually unique. But did you
Theoretically.
consider things like serial numbers and other
Right. So the question is, why didn't we look at any other methodology of uniquely identifying a machine for deployment? And unfortunately, I don't want to say it's somewhat of a chicken and egg problem, but I guess it is. Pixie, at the time that we implemented it for Windows 2000, was the front runner in uniquely identifying a machine at a very low level. And it uses the SMBIOS GUID as that identifier. So one thing that we've had a couple of internal groups do is within RIS, they'll either say there's an Active Directory property, or they'll even build an offline SQL database that actually maps the GUID to the serial number of the machine, so they can use the serial number later in the install process. I know it's backwards. No, I don't believe so. I believe that the only piece of information that's handed over the wire is the GUID right now. We can look into that one. I'll check for you. Mm-hmm.
Just one more with the management side. I know I'm not so familiar with the tools and stuff, but is there like a wish list or something? Essentially, like they asked the question before about something where we can make suggestions.
Yeah, there's MS Wish, but it's.
I mean, is there one specific for that?
Being careful not to give out my email legally so I get bombarded. There isn't. There really isn't. How many people are there? There really isn't. I think between the Usenet news groups, basically, sorry I didn't cover the question. It's how can I get product feedback in about deployment? And MS Wish is the traditional way to do that. So I guess the first chain of support you should do is, yes, use MS Wish. So at least we have a record through the official chain of how it happened, of who requested it. And actually, I think that's legally the right way for us to probably do it. So I am pretty progressive. I do check MS Wish. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of deployment wishes that come in. So please go ahead and do submit it that way, and we can definitely take a look at it. The other thing is I know some deployment-related companies we do try to have pretty good relationships with. So if you're a deployment-related company, then definitely talk to me, and we can get an input agreement in place and make sure that we can talk pretty openly about what you need, that kind of thing. Are there any other questions? One more.
What's the level of networking that's available? You said TCP/IP. NetBIOS, RPC, available networking?
I don't believe NetBIOS is there. I want to say RPC works, but it is IP-based, IP only. There's no IPX support. Again, it's designed to be as thin as possible, so it's not totally IP-based. Answer your question? Anything else? All right. Well, thank you very much for coming, and thank you for attending.